Today we're going to talk about Chapter 10, Lesson 3, about the Qin and Han dynasties. All right, so first let's talk first with the Qin. So remember we talked about the period of warring states from about 400 to 200 BC-ish, and there was a ruler of one of the states, the Qin, and that ruler set out to defeat all the other states and the Zhou dynasty. So he does that, and he declares himself the emperor of all, right? And he names himself Qin Shi Huangdi, and which means basically the first uh, Qin emperor. Um, so he unifies it. He is determined to keep control. And remember how the governors who used to kind of rule different little districts, well, they passed that power on to their families, their sons and relatives. Well, that changes during this dynasty. Qin wants to have the complete control, and he wants to be able to appoint those people and people who will be loyal to him. So he takes that away, that it's just in your family. And if you dare disagree with him, he punishes you harshly or even kills you. If there were writings he didn't like, right, histories that didn't make him look good, or anything that he didn't approve of, he just had them burned. He hired government censors. Censors are government officials who watch the other government officials to make sure the government workers, to make sure that they're doing their jobs. So it was very tight control. He did some things to try to unify the empire. One thing he did was to make a uniform currency. Before this, money was different in the different states. So he makes one type of money that everyone has to use. Another thing he tried to do to unify the empire was to hire scholars who are going to set out to make the Chinese writing system a little simpler, and having set rules and then publish that, like try to make everyone doing it the same, because it wasn't that way before, because of all the long periods of the different states doing it their own way. He also had a lot of building projects, and some of them were definitely good for everyone. One of the biggest ones was this huge canal. Remember, he makes people work on these. The farmers had to help with these building projects. The huge canal was a benefit. It connected parts of central and south China. And the benefit also is that they can use it for transportation, right? So they can bring supplies to the soldiers in distant territories and keep better control, right, on the outskirts. So that's good. He had the normal building projects, palaces, dams, roads, but he also had them spend a lot of time working on his tomb. I have a movie to show you about this, but basically, he had a very extravagant idea of, he wanted to have life-size figures of an army and people to serve him, but mostly an army to protect him in the afterlife. And there were horses and carriages and everything, and it was all life size. And so they had these artisans spending a lot of time making these life size soldiers out of clay, right, terracotta. And I will show you more about that, but it's really interesting. All the faces were individually done and artistic. Okay, so they spent a lot of time on that. And also, he started what we now call the Great Wall. Actually, I shouldn't say he really started it. The previous rulers in the north had walls built to try to protect from the nomads who lived in the Gobi Desert. And they're the Xiongnu. And the Xiongnu were nomads who would come in and attack, and were really irritating and ruined their civilization up in the north a lot. So he wanted to kind of join those existing walls into a better protection in the north. So they spent a lot of time, forced labor, helping him build his wall. Okay. He actually was very good and controlled, but he also boasted that he was going to have his dynasty and it would rule China forever. But of course, he was so strict and everything after he died. The other aristocrats and even the farmers revolted against the next ones because they didn't like that harsh of rule. So eventually, his dynasty does die out, and a new dynasty takes over. Okay, and Liu Bang was a farmer turned soldier, and he was able to, take over and make what comes to be known the Han Dynasty. Okay, and so Han Wudi is the most famous, like strongest emperor of this dynasty, and he gets a lot of credit too for putting in some, difference at changing things. So, like, one thing is civil service exams. Remember, we had kind of foreshadowed earlier about the ideas of Confucius becoming very popular, and he did not like that there were a lot of people that were unqualified in the government and had just gotten it, through aristocrat passing it down kind of thing. So he puts in civil service tests, and you had to be recommended, and you'd have to be interviewed, and then you'd take this test, and whoever scored the best on the test basically would get the job. And it was very competitive. You had to prepare for years. And so, even though it was open to everyone, in reality, it was really more, geared for the educated who could afford it, right? The rich can afford to educate their sons for years on studying law and history and the ideas of Confucius. Um, so they do start some schools to make it so you can go and prepare for the exam. And after you study for many years, then you can take the test. And if you do well, you can get a government job or become a teacher. And so anyone in this category, it was kind of a new social class, and they had a lot of respect. People really respected all the years of education they had, because remember, education is important in the ideas of, Confucius. Okay, and the other thing is, so do you remember earlier we had talked about how the fathers passed down their land and all the sons split it, and how I told you eventually that is going to become an issue. So this is the time period that that's going to finally come to a head. That it's during the Han Dynasty that the land has been passed down enough that the land is too small. The average person only has about an acre of land, which isn't really enough to make a life for your family and feed all your family. So what ends up happening is a lot of the farmers have no choice but to sell to the wealthy, and the wealthy are buying up all these farms and making, a killing. And the average farmer has to end up being a tenant farmer, right? So a tenant farmer, remembers when you work someone else's land and you get to keep a portion of the crops, and you have to give a big portion to the wealthy. So the wealthy just get wealthier, right? Um, and so the Chinese, the population has gotten so big that there really isn't enough land. So during the Han Dynasty, they go out and conquer more. You can see in the map the expansion in all directions, basically. And then after that, there's a good 150 years or so of peace. Okay, and then because there's peace, right, we've always talked about how that means the arts can flourish, right? People can, have time and money and everything for that. So we see literature and the arts are blossoming during this time period. We have a lot of copies of different writings that are done. And we notice that painting and sculpting isn't done just for religious reasons during this period. That, like, actually it's expanding towards even people of less prominent families can afford to it. So it's expanding a lot. And also during this Han Dynasty, the ideas of Confucius really grew and became very popular. And that idea of filial piety, which we talked about before, about respecting your elders and taking care of your older family members, is very strong during this time period. All right, also during the Han Dynasty, there's a lot of new inventions because we talked about, having to feed a large population. They're doing a lot for increasing farming production. So the cast iron plow instead of just a wooden plow helps them break up the soil better. And some new techniques are using to drain the swamps, and using iron tools is helping with that. And they can direct that water from that was in the swamps to the fields that were drier. So that's, and also in a way that they're improving farming in that area. Kind of unrelated to farming, water wheels. Water wheels, I'm sure you have probably seen. It's kind of like an energy source, right? And you can grind the grain with them, and so that was going to help them produce more grain for food. Also, drill bits are used to mine more salt. The wheelbarrow is used. Obviously, it's got a lot of uses. Very important invention. Silk manufacturing. Obviously, silk is going to become one of their major exports, so that was huge. Paper was actually invented first for wrapping, but then they realized it could be good for writing on. So, of course, we know paper is going to become a huge thing and spread throughout, all the civilizations. And then also one for sailing. So the rudder and a new way to move the sail, the two inventions improve sailing. And so for the very first time, they're able to sail against the wind and travel much farther. So that's going to help with their merchants wanting to go farther to travel all the way to like India, the Red Sea. Okay. Also, there's medical advances, like we talk about medicine in most of the chapters, right? Certain foods they realize can help prevent disease. They use a variety of herbs to treat illnesses. And one of the newer ideas, acupuncture, which of course people still do today to relieve pain. And it's very amazing that they were able to figure that stuff out way back when. And then I mentioned, okay, so the Silk Road. So the trade is going to expand, and the way that that happens is Hanwudi, the emperor, sends out his general to go try to find people who will help fight against those nomads in the north, the Xiannu. And so Zhang Xian is the general, and he is told to go out and explore west and look and see what you can find for people to help us. Well, he comes back 13 years later, and he doesn't really have anyone to help him fight the nomads, but he does come back with all these interesting stories about the other people and cultures and all the products they have. And one of them that is really interesting to Hamudi are these horses that are very strong and large, and Hanwudi wants them for his soldiers. So we believe that they were probably talking about Kazakhstan. And so he starts encouraging trade to try to get things like these horses. And of course, they trade their silk and other spices and other goods that are popular. And so this trade route that is called the Silk Road, after, of course, the most famous export, the silk. And it actually isn't just one road. In this particular map, they made it look like one, but honestly, it's kind of a trade network, right? There's obviously a variety of roads that kind of feed in, but that is the general, area. And it's very rough and it's very dangerous. There's a lot of bandits who know that people are going to trade with all these things. But a good trade does develop, and over the years they start to get things like peaches and pears. They send to India, and then India sends back like cotton and spinach. and all these things that, like, whatever you have that other people don't, they want to trade, right? And then of course the paper is going to be eventually traded, and that idea is going to spread far and wide. And so for about the next 1,000 years, right, this is the main link between Asia and Europe. And one of the other things that comes besides products is ideas, right? And so Buddhism is going to be one of those. The religion is coming from India to China on this Silk Road. All right, so why does the Han Dynasty, eventually collapse? Well, as it always happens, eventually you're going to get some weaker or dishonest emperors. There's also a lot of problems with corruption within the government officials, and aristocrats taking advantage of the farmers and, making them, give up their land. And so basically, there's a rebel, let's see, Luoyang, and he, you know, does kind of overthrow, and then eventually it turns into like a civil war. And so basically, it's many, many years of fighting again. And for about like the next 400 years, there isn't one unified empire anymore. It's all those different smaller kingdoms. And it's during that time when a lot of Chinese are kind of really interested in Buddhism. Um, it's very attractive to them with the ideas, of peace, and it's been a lot of upheaval with all the years of ruling, and so Buddhism is going to become really popular in China and become one of the more major religions eventually. And so that also, like I said, came from the Silk Road.